and welcome to this first session of the third day of TEF. I really appreciate that you all want to explore the power of pricing for your business, and so early in the morning too. Let's jump right in because we have a lot of concepts and a lot of strategies to cover. Pricing really is an intriguing area of how we run our businesses, and it has a massive impact on how much profit we make. I'm sure you all value the work you do, and your clients most likely value your work too. That is why they hire you, why they entrust you with their projects. I'm sure you would agree if I said that your work, your services create value for your customers. Pricing has nothing to do with that part. You create value by means of providing the right translation for the right client, for the right purpose at the right time. But now, good pricing strategies allow you to extract more of the value that your services generate. They allow you to claim more of that value for yourself. Pricing allows you and your client to redistribute the value created by your services. Pricing determines who gets to keep what part of the value that has been created. And that is exactly what we're going to explore here. I'd like to start my presentation view of what was promised to you when you signed up. So this is what is ahead of us. Pricing is a major lever of profitability and an important tool in any freelancer's toolkit. While larger corporations can afford to maintain pricing teams to come up with sophisticated solutions to extract more of the value created, small businesses often rely on very simple rules of thumb and cost-driven pricing, which hardly ever offers a full picture of how much one should charge for their services. I will address customer-driven pricing and competition-driven pricing, as well as costs that are not at all relevant for pricing. And of the many advanced pricing strategies available, we will discuss economic value analysis, which can be useful to price new services, such as machine translation post-editing, if it's new for you or your customers, vertical product lines that help you serve different budgets and needs, and the psychology of pricing also to influence how buyers think about your pricing. Now, as a business, you certainly need to cover all your costs and make a profit. That's the nature of business, right? Why a business exists in the first place. And please never apologize or feel uncomfortable about being in the translation industry or any industry for the money. If you're in this session, you're probably running a for-profit business and you're trying to maximize that profit. And that is exactly what you should be doing. Now, back to the costs. Not all of those costs that you incur in running your business will be relevant for the pricing decisions you make day to day. Now, how come? It is a business-related cost, you're thinking, so you have to pass it on to your client somehow, right? Well, the truth is that you would easily outprice yourself and maybe left with no revenue at all, and you will still have to cover all those costs that, as I said, are irrelevant to pricing. So pricing also really should not be based on cost alone. We have vastly different costs of running a business and costs of living, and we do not move our business or our primary residence to a different location just because it would lower our costs. The same is true for our customers. They have different budgets, different expectations, different willingnesses to pay, as we say in pricing and economics. And very often they have little understanding of what your costs are, nor do they typically care. And last but not least, we always operate in a competitive market. In fact, this conference is probably full of your competitors, and they make their pricing decisions every step of the way too. And they most likely don't make those decisions based on your costs, but their own. we have a few more technical concepts here, and in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to try and make them relevant to you. You will also notice that I'm using a few images here. A lot of the sessions at this TEF conference have been about AI, generative AI in particular. So I have used a number of images produced by Midjourney to sort of illustrate the point that we can all experiment with generative AI to enhance our work in various ways. Now, very briefly, who am I and what do I know about pricing and about language services? I've been a Czech linguist for a little over 20 years now. I am also a pricing consultant. I hold an MBA degree with a specialization in pricing and strategy. I'm also a certified pricing professional and a member of the Professional Pricing Society. And my email is shown here in case you have questions that cannot be answered here. Now, again, why do we talk about pricing? Why should we care? Why should you want to learn about pricing? You've always done pricing somehow, right? If you've been in the business for a while, you or your company has always made money through the services that you provide. Everyone does pricing more or less intuitively. It can't be hard, right? As business owners or in any other capacity you work in, we probably work with customers and make pricing decisions every day. It is something we do for a living. We aim to do it professionally, and we should really know what we're doing here. As I said before, the ultimate goal of pricing decisions is to extract more of the value your services generate. To convince you further that pricing is a useful tool for that, let me quote a Deloitte study from a while back where they were looking at how your profit changes if you change one element of things you do in your business and hold everything else constant. So no competitive response, for example. A 1% improvement in price leads to an 11% increase in profit on average. How does this compare to other aspects of what your business can do to improve its performance? For example, a 1% increase in sales would only lead to a 3.3% increase in profits. And it's even lower for improvements in fixed costs, for example. So as you can see, pricing is far superior to your other tools in the toolkit for your business. And from my experience consulting with different entities in the language services market, there is ample potential for improvement, and certainly also outside our industry. Now, I said earlier that pricing should really not be based on cost alone. What should it be based on then? Any pricing decision or strategy starts with the 3 C's, and you really need to give some thought to all 3 of them to make sound pricing decisions. I'm certainly not saying forget cost. So cost is certainly going to be one of the 3 C's. Let's start with the extreme scenario where we look at cost only. Whether you provide the linguistic services yourself, you produce them in-house, or you even outsource them, buy them, repackage them, add value to them somehow, and resell them, you incur some kind of cost. You could just sit down and write down everything you pay that has some kind of connection to running your business. You would do your math, add it all up, and you would get your overhead, as it's often called. And this figure is important, very important actually, because at the end of the financial year or calendar year or month or whatever period you care about, it is going to make the difference between you making a loss and you making a profit. And if you were to make a loss consecutively, you may not be able to afford to stay in the industry, right? And then for purely cost-based pricing, you take this overhead, this total cost, add a markup, margin, X%, divide by whatever unit you work with, hour, word, line, page, anything, and you would get the price that you should charge for that unit. But is that really a good way to determine your price? Well, no. Chances are pretty solid that you will leave money on the table for your customer to keep, or you will outprice yourself and not get the job. Those are the two most likely scenarios. The chance that your price done this way, calculated this way, will be just right is very slim. Our next C, customer, is another, or in isolation, can be another extreme scenario. Why do you think this perspective alone would give us an incomplete picture as well? Well, willingness to pay, the technical term that we use here for what your customer literally is willing to pay for your work, uh, they have no incentive to tell you. They might have a number in their head, but they will deliberately lie or simply not tell you how much they value your services. To get to any kind of meaningful information here, you really need to know your customer. You really need to know their line of business in order to estimate the value of your service to them. And it is important to note that your service probably has very little intrinsic objective value. Its value is more likely defined by its use case and its user. Your service creates value for a particular someone who is pursuing a certain objective. If you have a lot of customers, leads, if you were a larger agency, for instance, you would probably want to run some data analytics on your sales data and choice data to arrive at a market segmentation, a demand curve, and willingness to pay estimates. But you probably don't have any of that as a small business. Now, let's assume that despite the difficulties that I mentioned, you figure out exactly how much your clients are willing to pay and you charge exactly that much. Well, why is that not good enough? Because whatever their willingness to pay might be, your relevant cost may still be higher, in which case you cannot afford to serve that particular customer. And finally, our last C, why do you think competition alone would not give us a complete picture? Let's say you know of a competitor that you know is really successful. You look at their website, you call them up, you ask how much they charge, and once you know, you just copy their pricing. Would that be a good idea? Well, probably not, most likely not, and for several reasons not. Uh, First, if they're really successful, they probably don't have just one price. They probably don't have just one rate. So whatever pricing information you received when you asked will not be universally applicable. But perhaps more importantly, you don't know their cost structure unless you've really done your homework in terms of competitive research. And you don't know how price sensitive their customers are either. In other words, you may be making a major loss if you went by their prices simply because your cost may be higher than theirs or your clients may have a different willingness to pay. Nevertheless, this information about your competitors, at least the selection of your competitors that you think are close competitors in our very fragmented industry, serves as a useful point of reference to see how you compare to what else is available in your market and for what price. So in summary, your cost is the floor, the very minimum you must charge not to make a loss in the transaction. Your customer's willingness to pay is really the ceiling of what you can charge, what you can get away with that particular customer. And competition is your reference point. How do you compare to what else is available in the market? And all of these help narrow the range of any conceivable rates and give us a complete picture. Now, relevant costs. One of the four C's was costs. I already mentioned not all of your costs are relevant for pricing. So let me repeat one more time. All your costs obviously need to be covered in order for you to run a profitable business and for the decision whether or not you want to stay in business. But if you were to consider all your overhead when pricing your services day to day, you would actually be depriving yourself of the opportunity to cover some of those costs that are not relevant for your pricing. There will be many costs that are simply not relevant. One very basic example to illustrate this, if you rent an office space and you have a year-long contract, you owe that money regardless of anything that happens tomorrow or the day after, whether the next project comes in or not. And if you quote too high on the next project simply because you think your office rent needs to be factored into that price, you may be missing out on a project that may otherwise be quite profitable. And that profit would help you pay for the rent that you already owe anyway. And so such an expense as rent, office rent, or whatever space you use really shouldn't influence your pricing. You would possibly be outpricing yourself, and you would possibly, or very likely, prevent yourself from making any kind of marginal profit that could, at the end of the month or year, be used to pay for your fixed expenses, such as your office rent. In case this one example didn't clarify it enough, let's look at what costs are relevant. So what is most relevant is your marginal or variable cost, the cost of producing the next unit. And as an individual translator, it is the cost in monetary terms, a monetary expression of the cost of your time of translating the next one word or the next page. An incremental fixed cost that's possibly not all that relevant to individual translators, but what is very relevant is opportunity cost, the cost of foregoing an alternative, the cost of turning down another client, the cost of doing another job that would match, or rather the cost of not doing another job, an in-house job, for instance, that would match your skill profile. Then there is also the cost of disutility. Working causes most people disutility when compared with doing things we love even more. Some would even say that work causes pain. So this utility may not be linear. The first couple of hours per day might be fine, but then you start feeling the pain and want to compensate yourself for overtime, and you derive more disutility from working in the morning or at night, depending on your lifestyle, depending on your family obligations outside of work, and personal preferences simply. Now, what is not relevant as a cost for your pricing decisions? We already discussed rent, office rent, or any other space that you use for your work, any kind of IT equipment that you would have to have regardless in order to even stand a chance to be in the business. A phone bill, if you have unlimited calls and data, your internet connection, your electricity bill, all of that is a fixed cost. You would incur that whether the next project comes in or not. Any kind of sunk cost is irrelevant for your pricing. Effort and money that has already been spent, you cannot price to recoup it. You may not like to hear this, but your education is a prime example of sunk cost. That is not to say that it is useless, but you would not be doing yourself a favor if you factored in your education into your cost-based pricing. So you might ask yourself now, what are you supposed to do with all these costs that I'm saying they're not relevant? Who is going to cover them? Well, you are going to cover them from your revenue, but you can price optimally today based on cost, customer, and competitor criteria, and you can hope that these irrelevant costs will get recouped, but you cannot price in order to recoup them. Knowing the true costs that are actually relevant for pricing uh, can really help you figure out how low you can really go and not how much you should charge. So we spent some time talking about, and the next focus is going to be on customer, on value, economic value. Customer-oriented pricing is also referred to as value pricing because you price based on the value your services create for your specific customer. And we said earlier that your services presumably create value for your customers, which is the primary reason they use them. And there is one possible approximation of this willingness to pay of your customers. We can get to it through the economic value analysis, particularly useful for pricing new services such as machine translation, post-editing, or for new buyers. So it may not be a service that's new in general or new to you, but new to your buyer. So in simplified 3 steps, we take the reference value, we determine the closest substitute, what they already use so far. We determine or identify the differentiating factors. How does your service compare? Is it better? Is it cheaper? And we add them up and we arrive at the economic value of that service. And of course, you have to give your customer at least as much surplus as they would get from the next best alternative. Another possible way of achieving more revenue is using a vertically differentiated menu of services. You have a vertical differentiation when there is an unambiguous difference in quality, and everybody agrees about that. Not everybody will buy the highest end service because they may not need it, they cannot justify that expense, or they can't simply afford it, but they would still agree that it is better. And you can create a vertical differentiation where it doesn't exist naturally. You can dumb down a top tier service, or you can have naturally tiered services such as translation only versus translation, editing, proofreading provided with a colleague, for instance. Or you can have a junior translator working on something or a senior translator, light post editing versus full post editing, etc. And now we're going to talk about one of my favorite areas of pricing very briefly. Uh, how do you want to be seen? What's your strategic positioning? How do you want to be placed in your customer's mind map? Do you want to be seen as cheap or expensive, for example? Cheap certainly creates certain connotations, whether they are true or not for your service, and perhaps false sense of security, confidence in the provider, because there is confidence of the provider to command rates that are above the market average. I will leave it to your imagination to think about what cheap conveys between the lines. Fairness is an interesting concept and a very vague one too. I wanted to talk very briefly about discounts because we're running short on time here. Discounts are always better received than surcharges. Even if the final price charged works out to be exactly the same, it is naturally the opposite for us as providers. We prefer surcharges naturally. And I'm not suggesting that you should all start offering discounts and charging less, but it may be beneficial for your business to reframe some of your surcharges into discounts. Quote a higher base price perhaps and offer discounts for behaviors that you want to encourage, such as good time management on the part of your customers. And very briefly, let me mention prices ending in 9. They're very powerful. 99 versus 100 differs in the number of digits, 2 digits versus 3 digits. It's very pronounced. 99 is exactly 1% less than 100, but many people would swear that it's significantly cheaper. And you can use that to your advantage psychologically. So with that, I know I had to skip a few of the psychology in pricing items. I'm open to any questions from the online audience. Claudia, if you could open Slido for us.
Yes, I will share. We don't have any questions so far, but the audience, please go ahead and post your questions in Slido. The link is in the chat.
Perfect. If there are no questions, then I can perhaps go back to my slides and talk about some more of the psychology pricing items.
Yes, then I will stop sharing again and let you know when there are questions.
So I talked about how 99 is different from 100 in perception, a little less pronounced. You can see a similar phenomenon between 19 and 20. 19 looks significantly cheaper than 20, and the difference is more pronounced than between 20 and 21. To some extent, this also works with 8 endings or 7 endings. Spending someone else's money, your employer's money, for example, typically hurts much less than spending your own money, but also spending plastic, digital money, if you accept credit cards, for instance, hurts a lot less than the almost physical pain of parting with physical bills and coins out of your wallet. In some cases, a subscription, monthly, weekly, whatever frequency may make sense, especially if your service has a tech component where buyers are very used to working with subscriptions. Subscriptions often create a false sense of security again, where you know you're going to pay one fixed price rather than seeing the total rise with every word translated, every minute transcribed, or any other service you provide. It's called
Daniel,
flat rate bias. Yes.
we
Do we
have
have
one
questions
question.
now?
Yeah, we have one.
Perfect. I'm going to stop sharing then, and let's see what the question is. How do you best market your use of MTPE to your potential customers? I'm not sure if this is a pricing question, really. Well, many of my customers, for instance, use machine translation for speed, for faster time to market. And that is one possible way of framing it, of marketing machine translation as something that helps them achieve some of their objectives faster, not necessarily more cheaply, but faster. So that is one possible way of marketing your use of machine translation to your customers. I hope you have time to get to the flat rate bias. I'm interested in that. Claudia, do we have more time to answer questions, or do we have to let people go to the main session now?
Yeah, unfortunately, the main session is now starting in a bit, maybe one last minute until 31, and then I have to.
Yeah. Okay. So the flat rate bias, it's been confirmed by pricing research that customers consistently choose higher end, more expensive plans, for example, for mobile data, than what would be justified by their actual consumption, because they dislike uncertainty about the amount of the final bill. They want to avoid negative surprises. It has to do with something called loss aversion. People care more about avoiding losses than they care about achieving gains. So that's a very short summary what flat rate bias means in pricing. If there are any other questions, feel free to email me or message me on this platform, or email me on the address that I showed earlier on my slides.
Okay, then, Daniel, thank you very much for this great presentation. I'm sure there was a lot of information there that's relevant for the audience. And I wish you all a great day, and we'll now stop the recording and leave you all to the rest of the conference.
Excellent. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your help, Claudia.